Welcome to the Claire Isabel McGill Luz Auditorium of Silliman University. Before we begin, and as is fitting in all great undertakings, we invite everyone to a moment of prayer to recognize the presence of God. This is to be followed by the singing of our national anthem to recognize God's gift of country and people. Please rise for the prayer and respect for our flag. Be with us, Lord, we pray, that what we are about to do shall be for the glory of your mighty name. In Christ. Amen. Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Hayang maging pera sa sinaganan, hayang ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiging, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisingin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simaya, sa langit mong bukaw, may kilalang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang bislat ng matawat mo'y tagumpay na nahihinig. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng wala't pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa pingo. Ang ligaya ng pagmay mamati, ang pamatay ang dahil sa'yo.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 2021 International Cultural Exchange of Silliman University. Please welcome your host, last year's Miss Silliman International, Ademola Abigail Ayumide.
Mabuhay Philippines, all the way from the best university, the University Town, Dumaguete City, Philippines. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, wherever you're watching me from, because I know you're watching me from different time zone. My name is Ademola Abigail Ayumide, a student nurse from Nigeria. Welcome everyone to the 2021 International Cultural Exchange of Silliman University. Without further much ado, let's give our hands as we welcome the Igala International Student President, Daniel Penny, for his word of welcome.
We are finally here. Mabuhay, Sillimanians and the Philippines. Thank you for your hospitality to every international students here in Silliman. Welcome to ICE 2021, or the International Cultural Exchange here in Silliman University. This is an annual event showcasing our cultural identities and aspiring for the world to become a better place for all of us. The 2021 ICE has two parts: celebration of the United Nations Day, October 24, and celebrations of International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women on November 25. We are with the United Nations in celebrating the future that we want. So, stay where you are and enjoy our International Cultural Exchange. To the International Student Center with Kuya Mojo at Tega and Ate Jaja, thank you for making this possible. To my Higala international students from around the world, or my HISO family, don't let this pandemic delay you. Just keep on fighting and reach our goals. God bless us all. And welcome to the International Cultural Exchange 2021.
Thank you so much to our dynamic president, Daniel Penny from Papua New Guinea. Now let's move on to the next part, which is the first part of this occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, we have in our midst today Daryl Robinson, who hosted this particular segment. He is a graduate of the Silliman University, studying in the graduate school, and he is with a special guest today from the Department of Foreign Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, the celebration of the United Nations Day.
United there, United Nations.
And welcome to Silliman University's celebration of the International United Nations Day. Today's forum is a highlight of Silliman University's Office of Student Services in connection with our International Students Division, and also in collaboration with our very own High Soul organization. This year marks the 76th celebration of United Nations Day, and with the theme, Recovering Better for an Equitable and Sustainable World. Through the efforts of countless people worldwide, we too would like to celebrate this year's momentous day together with our earthly citizens throughout the world. But nevertheless, I would like to give a brief background on what today is all about. So on the 24th of October each year, it's actually identified as the International United Nations Day. This day followed a declaration by the United Nations General Assembly back in 1947, which designated the 24th of October the anniversary of the Charter of the United Nations as United Nations Day. And they did this by proclaiming that the day will be instrumental in making people aware. It shall be devoted to making known to the people of the world the aims and achievements of the United Nations and gain their support for its work. Also, by a further resolution, it was actually United Nations Resolution 2782, which was adopted in 1971 by the General Assembly. It was declared that the United Nations Day would henceforth be celebrated as an international holiday. And it was recommended that it would be maintained as a public holiday by all United Nations member states. This event also was instituted primarily to disseminate to the people worldwide the aims and accomplishments of the United Nations organization. So the United Nations Day is also it has an extended week. So it actually spans from the 20th to the 26th of October each year. So according to my calendar, we're on day 20. This is the 24th. So I guess we have 2 more days of celebration for this year's event. and furthermore, the aim of celebrating such a day, which is the United Nations Day, it's also the essential celebration of the values which the United Nations organization spells forth the principles of humanity, unity, and world peace. So today, actually, it hallmarks a great purpose for the world. And I am so thankful that we are here today to celebrate this year's 76th anniversary of the International United Nations Day. So I would like to next turn this over to our very own High Saw president, Mr. Daniel Panini. And sorry if I butcher your name, Daniel. I always call you Daniel. So take it away. It's all yours, Daniel.
So, thank you. And good evening, everyone. So, first off, I would like to welcome everyone to the Zoom fellowship. Others will join soon. Now, I believe this pandemic has really affected all of us in one way or the other. But I hope after the fellowship, enlightened and be encouraged. And once again, to welcome everyone to this fellowship. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel, for your welcoming. Let's move on. We have the opening prayer that will be given by Mrs. Claudine Sabayang.
Okay, let's move on to the prayer, everyone. Let us all bow down our heads in prayer and remember that we are in the holy presence of God. Dear God, we thank you for giving us the opportunity to celebrate the United Nations Day that is observed around the world today on the 24th of October, 2021. We pray that you will always be with us to continue on strengthening the ideals of peace through nonviolent means. This year, As we heal from the COVID-19 pandemic, help us to always be inspired to think creatively and collectively about how to help everyone recover better, how to build resilience, and how to transform our world into one that is more equal, more just, equitable, inclusive, and sustainable. Dear God, we pray for our brothers and sisters that are hit the hardest by this pandemic. We lift our hands in prayer for them who are caught in conflict and are especially vulnerable in terms of access to healthcare. Please be with them in their battle in overcoming this pandemic. We pray that the surge of stigma, discrimination, and hatred will be healed by you, dear God. Help us be reminded that we are not each other's enemy and help humanity make peace with each other and that we will still able to keep our faith in you. Guide us through this year's event so that everything may proceed as planned. Be with us and bless us in our joint effort of the United Nations family as we focus on recovering better for a more equitable and peaceful world. Today, as we celebrate peace by standing up against acts of hate online and offline, and by spreading compassion, kindness, and hope in the face of the pandemic, and as we recover, be with us, dear God. This we pray in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Miss Claudine. Now, next that we have is something that I always look forward to, and that's introducing everyone I guess to everyone here within the forum. So if I might ask if everyone could just introduce themselves, and I'll just start off. Basically, just give your name, your course, and where you're from. Okay, to make this quick and easy, I'll start it off. Hello, everyone. I am Daryl Robinson. I am currently the host for today, and I am in my second year of my master's course. I'm taking a Master of Arts in psychology, majoring in counseling psychology, and I'm from the United States. So I guess I'll let Miss Claudine be next since she already spoke, and then we can just keep going down the road. Miss Claudine?
Okay, thank you for that. Hi, everyone. My name is Claudine Alessandria Ramos Subayang, and I'm from Jakarta, Indonesia. And I'm a second year student in the College of Business Administration, majoring in finance. Thank you. Next, our president.
Hi again, everyone. So my name is Daniel Penny, and I'm the current president of HISO. I'm from Papua New Guinea, studying biology here.
Hi, I'm Saskia Doring. I'm first year high school. I just graduated last year from elementary, and I'm twins with Sarah Doring.
Hi, I'm Sarah Doring, twin of Saskia, first year of high school. And I'm from the Philippines and half German too.
All the way from Germany, Mariam.
Yes, hello, my name is Mariam. I'm from Germany. I was in the Philippines at the business administration, I think. In 2018 I arrived, so 3 years ago. And yes, currently I'm in Ingolstadt in Bavaria, doing my master's degree in the first semester.
Right. We'll reserve the introduction of our guest of honor, Kira Sarah, later. So she's the queen of the night. We'll introduce her in the proper time.
So next on our agenda, we have a special song selection from our high school international students, Miss Saskia and Miss Sarah. So just have your ears. Welcome to these beautiful young ladies, their voices. So take it away.
Try
Thank you so much for that beautiful intermission from Sarah and Saskia. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest of honor, our guest speaker. Uh, our guest speaker for this evening is Mrs. Kira Danganan Azucena. She's the Charge d'Affaires and Deputy Permanent Representative of the Philippines to the United Nations in New York. I can say that this is a great honor for her to take time out of her busy schedule to speak to us today. So please be attentive and listen to the information and her message for us this evening. Thank you. Mrs. Kira, sorry.
Thank you, Daryl, for those kind words. Good evening, everyone. How is everybody doing? Good, good. Okay. First of all, let me begin by thanking Daryl and Daniel, and of course Jaja through Kuya Mo for this invitation to join you this evening. I'm very happy to meet you, although it would have been nice to be able, if we had this in person. There's a lot that is lost in having to meet virtually, because I always believe that real connections are made if we had our interactions face to face. But under the circumstances, we still decide to be grateful that we are still able to gather in a fellowship like this, thanks to technology. And we just have to keep on hoping that better days are coming and we will be able to again have our fellowship in person and face to face. I also would like to I also would like to congratulate the organization for you know, gathering yourselves in a unit like this. It's more than just creating a fellowship among foreign students in Silliman. I hope that this grouping has helped you cope with the challenges of being in a new place and having to deal with a culture that is somewhat different from yours, and reinforced a sense of belongingness, at the same time pride in the culture that you represent. I have had many friends that were non-Filipino when I was studying in Silliman. By the way, I studied in Silliman all of my student life, from kindergarten all the way to college. So many of my good friends, I had a good friend from Japan, from Indonesia, from somewhere in Africa. I forget the name of the country. But what I do remember was that it was always a pleasure to be in their company, because they had so many stories to share, stories that were all new to me. So in that sense, I hope that I know that your presence here also fosters, a greater understanding of what the world is out there in the world outside. I would also like to think that for you, Silliman fosters a welcoming environment that embraces people of other nationalities. And as I said, I would like to think that your group, among others, promotes among local Sillimanians the understanding that while we look and sound different, and we may come from countries located an ocean away, there are really more commonalities than there are differences between us, and that we should focus on these, so that in the end we can achieve a sense of, fraternity and unity among all of us. And from this perspective, from the perspective of Silliman as well, I also hope that the university appreciates the value of your presence and your organization, and that it recognizes how it helps cultivate an international outlook among the students. I have noticed that the university has actively launched an outreach program to attract foreign students to its campus, and I believe that this was a very good step to take. It has been said many times that the world has gotten smaller. To me, it meant that because of advances in technology, communications, and travel, people and lives have become more interconnected, so that an event in one side of the world impacts countries located in the other side. There is therefore an opportunity for us, and I venture to say even an obligation, for us to care about what happens to our brothers and sisters across the seas, to help, to learn, to share, and to grow together. Which brings me to the purpose of your fellowship today, which is to mark United Nations Day or UN Day. Daryl has given us a very short but comprehensive history of what that meant for us. Um, and I know that everybody has heard of the United Nations, but do we really know what the United Nations is about? What does it do actually? Does anybody wish to share their ideas on this? Because I myself, having spent 4 years of my life, in my professional life with the UN, it took me a long time to also come up with a simple answer to this question. What is the UN and what does it do? Do you have any volunteers? Daryl, yes?
Yes, ma'am. To make it short and sweet, I believe the United Nations provides member nations to come together as a common collective to discuss and or to harness, democracy and human well-being throughout the world. In a nutshell, it brings common minds together to harness peace throughout the world.
Thank you. Very, very good insight from Daryl here. Anybody else wants to share on what their idea of what the UN is about and what it does? Okay, maybe you're still thinking about it also. So, from my perspective, let me just go back to why and how the UN was founded in the first place. Remember that the UN, the United Nations, was formed back in 1946, right at the heels of World War II. And the purpose of the founding fathers, of which the Philippines was one, of the United Nations was basically, bottom line, to spare the human race from the scourge of war and to bring prosperity to the world. So basically, the United Nations reason for being was to prevent another world war. This meant attaining and preserving peace and achieving prosperity to all peoples of the world while preserving their rights, the rights and dignity of each human person, regardless of their circumstances. So this is what I came up in a nutshell of what the UN is about and what it's supposed to be doing. So based on that definition, prosperity and rights and dignity of each human person have evolved since then, since 1946. So today, the United Nations tackles topics that span the spectrum of these concepts, from preserving biodiversity to combating desertification. You know, desertification is when a particular land becomes a desert over time because of circumstances and factors. Nuclear disarmament and lethal autonomous weapons. These are weapons that are basically drones, persons with disabilities, migrants, refugees, the law of the sea, a very important topic for the Philippines. Middle income countries, also a very important topic for the Philippines, especially in these pandemic times. The connection between human rights and sustainable development, peacekeeping, gender equality, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. These are just some of the topics that the UN tackles. And just to show how varied and how wide the scope is, of the UN's work. So, how does the UN make a difference? I've mentioned all of these topics, but it seems that all they do over there at the United Nations is talk. Isn't that the impression? In a sense, that's true. We talk and we meet, and that sums up the bulk of what the United Nations does in reality. Remember, the United Nations is not a government. On the other hand, it is composed of 193 governments, sovereign states. We call them member states. And these member states have decided on their own accord to come together and jointly work towards addressing the most urgent problems facing humanity today. Many of these member states have problems with each other: the United States and China, Azerbaijan and Armenia, Pakistan and India. Yet, despite these problems, or because of these problems, they choose not to go to war about their problems and instead talk about it. That's why the most interesting meetings in the UN, many of them happening in the Security Council, you will hear these countries exchange very strong words with each other, even trading insults, And that's perfectly fine. That's normal, because if you think about it, it is a way better alternative than waging war, which brings with it an unspeakable cost to humanity. So, in a sense, yes, the United Nations is a talk shop, but as any communicator will tell you, everything begins with understanding each other. With understanding each other, you agree to come up with ideas, you agree to come up with programs to address the problems that each of us are facing jointly, or if you can't participate in jointly addressing the problem, you help that particular country increase their capacity to respond to the problems that they are facing on their own. So this brings me to the theme for this evening. Your theme for this evening is, please remind me, Daryl.
This year's theme is recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world.
Recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
this touches on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which we also know as the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. I won't go into discussing the SDGs in detail, but for purposes of our event today, I would just like to make one point. The SDGs are important for the global community for two reasons, for in both form and in substance. In form, because it is a document that was the result of an unprecedented effort of all of the 193 member states to agree, to cooperate, and come up with important points of consensus and points of action. There was a conscious decision of all of these 193 independent states to look beyond differences and jointly recognize that unless we all work together, we cannot achieve the results that we want to save our humanity and the earth. So regardless of your level of wealth, your location in the globe, your values, beliefs, and cultures, some of them were democratic, some were not, the state of your human rights, whether you were armed to the teeth with the latest weapons or had no military at all to speak of, whether you were going through the throes of a civil war or you were experiencing a golden age in your economic growth, regardless of all of that, the SDGs demonstrated that all member states were important and that all their views must be heard. The 2030 Agenda can then be considered an output of the international community working as just that, a community. So in that sense, that was a very important document. The second is the content of the 2030 Agenda. It contained goals and targets that were specific and measurable and that cut across sectors that everybody agreed was important to make progress upon. What's unique about the content of the 2030 Agenda was that It set a deadline, but it also recognized that um, each country must be able to achieve all of these goals at their own pace. That's number one. So while there was a deadline for us to meet these targets, there was also a recognition that we must not um, must not make the same measurements applicable to everyone, to all of the countries, because each country was unique. Each country was facing its own set of challenges. Um, and each country, therefore, had the freedom to decide which ones of these targets and goals I will prioritize. So that's one. Number two, there was also this very categorical recognition that in order for everybody to achieve the 2030 agenda, everybody must pitch in to help each other. That's why capacity building was a very important element of the 2030 agenda, because it recognized that nobody can achieve anything until everybody has achieved their goals. So in a sense, that aspect of the content of the 2030 agenda was also very significant, very important, because it recognized that each country had its own set of goals, challenges, and therefore had to be assisted by other countries in achieving in the work of achieving those goals. So with that as the framework, as the context for today's fellowship, we now go to the challenge of how to achieve the 2030 agenda for sustainable development now that we are all suffering the effects of the pandemic. When the pandemic descended on humanity in early 2020, it was clear that this posed a very important challenge to the United Nations. Was it still relevant? How can the United Nations galvanize global action to save humanity from the effects of the pandemic? Can the United Nations do it? Remember that at that time, virtually every nation in the country had to go into lockdown, which means that new methods of work had to be developed and implemented, and they had to be done so very quickly because the pandemic brought about a sense of urgency on the things that we need to do, especially at that time. The pandemic also served to exacerbate, and not just exacerbate, first it revealed the gaps within each society in terms of what kind of services the citizens were needing. And second, it also exacerbated social ills that were already present even before the pandemic descended upon us. So for example, countries with already weak health systems suffered the most because the pandemic revealed the extent of the gaps in public health structures. The vulnerabilities to job loss among the populations, especially the developing countries, but also including those in the developed countries, were also highlighted. And this, again, brought about a new sense of urgency to governments to respond not just quickly, but also comprehensively. So the question therefore was, what is the best way for humanity to recover from the effects of the pandemic? And based on our experience with the United Nations, the story of the United Nations itself, the answer was clear. The pandemic affected everyone across the globe. Therefore, the only way to defeat the pandemic was also by working together. And this was effectively the theme or the overarching goal of all of the 193 member states that had to continue working through the pandemic because there was a recognition that efforts had to be made to galvanize the efforts of governments all over the world to come together and respond as a truly international community to help each and every country, especially the most vulnerable ones, to recover from the pandemic. And it so happened that the pandemic 2020, the year 2020, happened to be the 70th year anniversary, a very important milestone in the history of the United Nations. So it was a very stark reminder of what the United Nations set out to do and that it was still very much relevant in today's world. And that was essentially what kept the United Nations going, what kept the 193 member states going in terms of working towards coming up with an agreement, with action points, with recognizing where help was supposed to be sent in terms of, for example, for vaccines. But in any case, just to wrap up what I was going to say, the pandemic served as a very stark reminder to the United Nations that it still remains at the forefront of galvanizing international efforts to respond to this particular crisis, perhaps the most important one since World War II that has faced humanity. For the international community to respond effectively to the effects of the pandemic. At the center of the work, of course, was for the 193 member countries to make sure that the interests of all sectors of society, all sectors of our population, all elements that go into international progress are addressed and acted upon. For the Philippines, it was our core interests in making sure that they were included in the United Nations consolidated response to the pandemic, included the plight of migrant workers, assistance to middle-income countries. The Philippines is a middle-income country, and in fact, there were studies that showed that middle-income countries suffered very heavily as a result of the pandemic. And the Philippines demonstrated just that. We after many years of economic growth, for the first time we had an economic recession as a result of the pandemic. So that is how the United Nations works. It makes sure that each country has a platform to articulate what are the important things for them, because that is the only way for the entire humanity, the entire international community to really progress as one, if all of the interests of all of its members are taken into account and addressed. So I'll leave it at that. Just to note that I am no longer with our mission to the United Nations. I've since come back to Manila in March, and now I am with our home office, the Department of Foreign Affairs, and now I'm handling the Office of American Affairs, which is the office handling the bilateral relations with the United States and all of the other countries in the Americas. So thank you again for this privilege. I do hope to be able to see you in person soon, and I'm hoping that there will be more of you, because I think it becomes your contribution to the university would just be richer and more significant if you. I'm sure there are more of you. It's just a question of of ensuring that the rest are also join you in the organization. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Kira, for your message, and I am sure that it has been well received. At least I can speak for myself. It was very well received, because some of the things that you have mentioned actually is part of some of my advocacies when I was a student leader. Well, actually, I'm still a student leader, but they also, affect me personally, and especially when you were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, because one of the development goals that I really have a fond interest to is the one dealing with inequalities, or basically human inequalities within and without countries. Uh, it's I hold it near and dear for many reasons, and I hope that out of the 193 countries, member states, I should say, they would actually embrace all of the SDGs that the UN has laid out, and hopefully come to an overall consensus that there needs to be changed. And also, not to speak too much, something that struck me when you were talking about how the pandemic has brought member states together to be able to tackle this pandemic, and especially when it comes to the healthcare and the medical services that our countries direly need. And I yes, things are changing. However, I know there's a lot to be done to be able to uh, promote equality amongst all countries when it comes to its healthcare. So, thank you again, Mrs. Kira, for your message. And I don't know, maybe Kuyamo, would you like to say anything as well, Kuyamo?
Oh, very thankful. I want you to know that you have someone who's really a role model when it comes to excellence. She was the editor of the Weekly Silliman when she was a student and graduated magna cum laude in mass communication. So we have a brilliant woman right before us this evening. So if you have questions to ask, she will be ready to answer and maybe share your own opinion. I really excited to hear from Mariam of Germany.
Hello, I'm sorry for the connection was bad. Maybe you could repeat the last sentence you said?
You can share your own opinion, Mariam, or ask a question.
Okay. I don't have any open question at the moment, but I like the presentation. And I also like the insights of Kira about the United Nations, and I'm glad that I got invited.
Danke schön.
Bitte sehr.
Are there any other questions or any comments about anything that was discussed?
So I'd like to say thank you again, ma'am, for the presentation. First thing, when I read the theme, the first word, unity. Yeah. So, like, how do we recover? The first word that we should think of is unity, and that's what the UN also standing for, right? That's why we have this like one week UN program in school, so we can learn from each other. We should also learn from other countries' weakness and also strength. That's gonna recover. And with our inequality, we cannot recover things. We have to be united, and we can't expect to change everything, right?
Thanks, Daniel. Although it was a bit choppy, actually, I do have a question. Also, and I guess for Miss Kira, I guess a brief introduction about background about myself. I was actually in the United States Navy quite some time ago. I retired, a few years ago. But you said something to me that actually kind of made me start questioning some things. And the first thing is being that as you mentioned, that United Nations is more of the talk, the talk body of the world, and I understand the impact that dialogue has between member states. But my question to you is, out of all of the talk that's, or I should say, the dialogue that's done amongst the member states, how much really is being put into action? Because, as an outsider looking in, it's just member states just, putting out what their position is on a certain topic, but it doesn't seem like there's too much collaboration or too much agreement without the impact of I guess I should say the National Security Council, because these are like the head member states, without them putting their stamp on things. So how much is really being done in the world, I should say?
Thank you, Daryl. That the answer to that question, I think, will take an entire day to demonstrate. But let me just cite an example. Essentially, what you're saying is that do the talks ever end up in action? Right? Do they ever, take on some form, concrete form that actually makes a difference on the ground? And let me cite an example on that, the situation of the human rights in the Philippines. If you recall, about 3 years ago, there was a resolution passed at the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is based in Geneva, which essentially put shine the light on the state of human rights abuses in the Philippines, in particular the alleged extrajudicial killings, the question of impunity, basically stating that there are so many victims of this war on drugs, and the perpetrators, many and in pursuit of this war on drugs, there are many persons in uniform that have abused their position and have actually killed so many suspected drug users and drug pushers. And essentially, so that was a very big debate in the Human Rights Council. It was also a very big issue back home domestically, because as you may have already noticed, we have a very active civil society in the Philippines. They're basically free, very similar to the United States. They're free to articulate, they're free to talk, they're free to make their own initiatives, and most importantly, they shine the light on actions of government that they deem to be unacceptable or should not happen. So this is what happened in the case of the war on drugs issue on the Philippines. So what was the outcome of that? So that resolution passed by a very small margin. But what was the outcome of that resolution? Essentially, it mandated the High Commissioner for Human Rights to investigate the situation on the ground, as far as the human rights record, as far as the war on drugs issue is concerned in the Philippines, and that the contents of that investigation be put in an official report, and that report to be submitted to the Human Rights Council at its next session. So that resolution was mainly tabled by Iceland and co-sponsored by 48 other member states, mostly Western, but a number also of Latin American countries. But no, the point is that there was this decision by the council. Although we opposed it, of course, there was decision by the council to really look into the state of the human rights situation in the Philippines. So what happened after that? What happened after that was that we, the Philippines, we decided that we are a responsible member of the international community. We are a founding member of the United Nations. We have always been at the forefront of human rights, not just both in the international community and especially in ASEAN. You're familiar with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. We have as far as our human rights laws domestically are concerned, we have had we were way ahead of other countries, including the West. We were the first to come up with a Magna Carta for women. We were the first to come up with a human rights declaration. We were the first to come up with a Magna Carta for persons with disabilities. So, as far as track record is concerned, we were there. So, why is this happening to us now? This is not, you know, there has to be a way to reconcile our track record in terms of human rights and what's happening at the Human Rights Council. So what happened was the Philippines, instead of fighting it out with Iceland, we decided to cooperate with Iceland. So within those 2 years between the passing of the resolution and the due date of the report of the Human Rights Council, we teamed up with the enemy, Iceland, and the co-sponsors. And what did we decide? We decided that, okay, this is how you perceive the situation to be in our country. What do you think needs to be fixed? So with that approach, we came up with a United Nations joint program. The joint program is an agreement between the Philippines and the United Nations that provides capacity building assistance to the Philippines to for a number of specific objectives. One of them, for example, is to strengthen the capacity of our national police. So the national police would, would undergo trainings specific on human rights awareness, etc. And then we have another program that would strengthen our judicial system. One of the weaknesses in the Philippines is that our judicial system tends to be, slow moving. It moves, but it's slow. And why is that? Because we don't have enough courtrooms, we don't have enough, judges, etc. So it's basically, it's not a question of, how do you say it? Sincerity or technical competence. Is a question of, manpower. Do we have enough? Which, and the answer to which is none. We decided to strengthen the Commission on Human Rights, which is an independent human rights institution, which it should be pointed out is not present in all of the 193 member countries. The Philippines is one of few countries that has an independent human rights institution. So, in other words, the United Nations Joint Program sought to precisely address the issues that were pointed out in the resolution against the Philippines at the Human Rights Council, with the view that assistance be provided to the Philippine government to rectify these gaps and these weaknesses. So what happened was, 2 years ago, there was a resolution against the Philippines tabled by Iceland. 2 years after, the same resolution was tabled, but this time it was jointly sponsored by Iceland and the Philippines. And the tone was totally different. So it became positive, it became forward-looking, and of course, the centerpiece of that follow-up resolution was this United Nations joint program. And this joint program, while it was to be implemented by the Philippine government and the United Nations, of course, it needed money. So now there was this opportunity for member states. If you want to really help, if you want to put money where your mouth is, then you provide funding for it, because we need trainers to come up with the training programs for all of our people, etc. So that I think is a very good example of how you say walking the talk. So it's talking that actually ended up in a very concrete action point that right now is already being implemented.
Thank you, Ms. Kira, for that. I feel informed now because, again, as an outsider looking in, it's more we see just more of the talk, and we don't understand the intricacies the uh, of the process, because uh, I know things take time, but I think we've come to a point in evolving as human that we don't take time. Well, we look at time as something that needs to be harried, and I know there are a lot of things that are going on in the world that just really just takes time, and so we just need to take a step back and just await a time with patience. So I think that's the easiest way of saying it. Okay, thank you again.
Can everyone share like a wish or something that you envision for the United Nations to achieve this year or beyond, especially concerning your own country? Maybe Indonesia?
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Miss Kira for providing us with very insightful information. And yeah, I totally agree with Daryl because, like, from an outsider's point of view, it seems like, they're just talking. We're funding them, but they're just talking and there's no action. But, like, maybe in my perspective, how I saw it or how I see it now, yeah, everything needs to start with communication, right? Like, you need to talk it out first before you're gonna take action. So yeah, I totally agree with what Miss Kira just explained and emphasized to us. And another point that I totally agree with was the point of, with this pandemic, we got to see all the vulnerabilities of every country, even power countries like the States, even, well, they have their flaws, right? But as for me in my country, Indonesia, I guess one of the most alarming things that we saw from the past few months, or when the virus reached its peak, it was the healthcare system that we had. It seemed to be very flawed because I remember at one point of the peak that hospitals were actually over flooded, and even patients who are very sick were supposed to wait outside, and they had like camps outside, and even sadly to say, there are many who died on the streets just for waiting to become or to avail of a room inside the hospital. So it's very alarming, and I hope to see the UN address more situations or more things that can help third world countries or developing countries in their healthcare systems, because it seems that, oh, I think we're lacking so much in so many aspects, especially with the corruption of our government. And I'm not gonna even touch with that subject, but yeah, it's pretty sensitive, and I know everyone knows, but it's a thing that we need to fix in order to have our country and all the other countries in the UN or outside of that to really be able to work together and have a strong build, because I feel like at any moment the United Nations can actually just, okay, bye, I'll leave or whatever. And I feel that, yeah, we need to really gain solidarity or have something really tie us together so war will not break out. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
I guess I'll speak for the U.S. And what Kuyamo has actually mentioned. What would I like to see for the world? My same wish is the same that it's been for years. Equality amongst the races within the United States. That's one big thing that I see our down point. Again, like what Claudine said, in her country, she witnesses many flaws, and yes, no, we have more flaws than I can speak of tonight. But I just wish for equality amongst all. I guess I should say of everyone, and with the United Nations. Hopefully, that message can uh, be put on full display that we are one race, and that's the human race. And yeah, that's all I can say from my perspective. Thank you.
Let's hear Germany this time. Hello, Mariam. Guten Abend.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Mariam.
Very good.
Anything you would like to share from the perspective of Germany and your wish for the United Nations to achieve?
A good question. Let me think about it and come back to you.
Okay, Papua New Guinea.
So, well, like Claudia said, apart from corruption in the government, I wish a good healthcare assistance for Papua New Guinea. We're at the peak of Corona, and the hospitals there are really full. Even though we have support from the US and Australia, I feel like we need more support. I've been reading news and following up. Like people are dying right now, really packed up and full. I wish the UN will look into that and supply more healthcare.
Thanks, Daniel. Miss Miriam, do you still need more time to think? Do you have any comments or any wishes for the UN?
Actually, I'm not that informed about Germany and in the context of the United Nations, so I cannot really bring a contribution to that. And what I was doing in the meantime was looking up what Germany is doing in that context. And as I've seen, Germany is not really a permanent member of the Security Council or the United Nations committees, but I don't know, maybe Kira knows more about that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I had to answer my husband who had a question for me.
Of course. No problem. I was just saying that I'm not very well informed about Germany and in the context of the United Nations. Maybe you can give us an insight into that, because that was what I was doing in the meantime, researching a bit about Germany.
Okay. Well, Germany is a member of the subgroup, the Western European and other groups in the UN. So they're basically a member of the developed countries group. But they are a very active member of the United Nations. They are very much engaged in its work, both in security, in terms of the Security Council and other agenda items that deal with regional and national security, but also in terms of development. So they have been, they have their own, as far as I know, Germany has a very strong ODA program, no, which is their investments, trade, grants that they offer to developing countries. And these ODA are largely guided by those things that are important to Germany. So, if I remember correctly, Germany's ODA grants are mostly focused on environment, like biodiversity conservation. They're also very much into empowerment of women and girls. So many of their programs to developing countries focus on family planning, providing safety nets or assistance to women and children, and especially girls who are affected by conflict or war or who are displaced. These are some of the programs that Germany is very visibly supporting. In terms of security, if I remember correctly, Germany was just a member of the Security Council, so they had a very active voice in addressing the security threats that we face today. They are also very much involved in storing or addressing peace and order issues in some regions. For instance, I know that they're very active in rehabilitating or doing what they can to restore stability in Afghanistan. They're also very much into investments in Africa to spur economic development there as a partner in efforts to restore peace, achieve peace and stability also in that area. I also believe that they have been vocal in supporting the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, especially the arbitral award that the Philippines won in terms of our maritime rights in the West Philippine Sea. That's as far as I remember of what Germany stands for in the United Nations. But suffice it to say that they are very active. They are an important member of the United Nations. And I think that they also recognize what the United Nations can do in terms of helping Germany meet their own national priorities, but also in achieving goals that were set for particular regions or even for the international community as a whole across all sectors: security, development, environment, etc. So in short, Germany is a good member of the United Nations.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Do you think there's something that Germany could do better?
Well, as you know, we have the climate change talks coming in the next week, and that will be held in Glasgow, UK. And always the climate change conferences there's always a divide between the emitters and the non-emitters. So the developing countries are the ones that absorb the emissions of the developed countries. But the thing is, climate change talks are also focused on how the effects of climate change are affecting more severely the already vulnerable countries. So what are the effects of climate change? More frequent and stronger typhoons, higher temperatures that cause sea level rise, and what are the consequences of devastation from typhoons and sea level rise? Displacement, people from their communities, of course, deaths, damage to property, and what does displacement? What is the byproduct of displacement? Political unrest and therefore instability, and therefore the bigger picture, instability within the borders or even across borders, especially in Africa. When the effect of climate change is that you have less water resources because they're drying up. So what do the people, especially those that live in the desert, do? They have to go find other sources of water. So that's why they go to another place, maybe cross a border, and subjugate another tribe, and that's where insecurity and unrest starts. So these days, talks on climate change are already crossing over to security threats and emerging threats and questions of political stability and even counterterrorism. We see how things are intertwined, and therefore one action in one area will have consequences in another area. So that's why in climate change talks, we always say the burden of reducing gas emissions are on the emitters, not on the absorbers. So that's an example. Since Germany is a developed country, that's an example where Germany can make a difference if they can make a commitment to further reduce gas emissions and therefore make a very significant contribution to the continuing efforts to lessen climate change, to lower the temperatures and lessen climate change. That's just one example.
Thank you very much. I think that's one topic that is very big at the moment, also in Germany. Everybody's talking about it, and they've put it as a goal for the next.
Okay. Danke schön, Mariam. And so with that, there were two comments about corruption and healthcare. Would you like to react on that, Madam Kira, from Indonesia and Papua New Guinea?
Corruption and healthcare. What I want to share about that is that remember that the United Nations is not a government. It's also not police. It's not an international police. It's basically a forum where countries can share their experiences, what they're going through, and what they need in order to face the challenges and thrive. So, and because of this dialogue, because of these exchanges, the other member states can now see the opportunity where they can be of assistance to that other country, because they might have gone through the same problem in the past, and therefore they have lessons learned, and maybe that can be a point of cooperation between country A and country B. For example, we have our own insurgency problem in Mindanao, and we have had our peace accord signed, but we're still facing a lot of challenges in the implementation. Meanwhile, Colombia has had its own peace problems, and they also had their own peace accord signed, but they're also going through their own set of problems. So what are we? So all of that has been discussed and aired out in the United Nations, and then along in the course of the discussions, there was an effort from both the Philippine and the Colombian sides. Why don't we sit down and then let's share information, let's exchange good practices, with the view that maybe we can learn from each other. So that's an example. So basically, the same thing could work for how to address your shortages in terms of universal healthcare and fighting corruption. On universal healthcare, if you remember, 2 years ago, just before the pandemic descended upon us, we had just signed a universal healthcare law. And the impetus for us to sign a universal healthcare law was brought about by the UN, because the years before that, there was this recognition by all of the 193 member states that if you want a responsive and comprehensive healthcare system that will meet the needs of your population without them having to pay for it very costly rate, you need universal healthcare. And based on what we have learned from the other countries that already had universal healthcare, these are the elements that you need to include, in coming up with a law that will establish universal healthcare. One is you have to know where to find the money to pay for your universal healthcare. Number two, who are the agencies involved? In other words, the United Nations came up with a template for a universal healthcare system. And the Philippines followed that template and came up with its own law that established a universal healthcare system for the Philippines. The universal healthcare system would have provided every Filipino to be able to go to any hospital without having to pay for anything, similar to what they have in Hong Kong or in Canada. Unfortunately, it's not yet in place in the United States. But basically, that's the idea. You shouldn't have to pay a hefty price in order to get medical attention, in order to get your hands on medicines and medical care. So we had already signed that following the United Nations template. But the thing is, we didn't have a chance to implement it because the pandemic had already arrived. So the same thing could happen for anti-corruption and anti-corruption. For example, I know that there's this agency in the United Nations called United Nations Organization on Drugs and Crime, came up with a template as well of how an effective anti-corruption law should look. And it has established a special unit within the organization that can make a study on the specific needs of each member state in terms of fighting corruption within its system. So, in other words, the United Nations has the resources. It has the resources in place to be able to offer technical assistance to a member state to increase its capacity to fight corruption. And it's not just on that particular area, but also in other areas as well, like counterterrorism. So that's the whole idea of the United Nations. It's there. It's just it, and it's each member state may tap that resource in order to meet its own national priorities. Thank you.
Okay, maybe one last thing from the Philippines. One time, our bad boy president tried to disconnect the country from the United Nations. Can a president really do that? Like total disconnection from the United Nations without even consulting the key people behind the connection or the relationship?
Yes, he can. As head of state, that is his prerogative. But it just so happened there were other elements in play there. Number one, there was a question domestically on whether indeed the president had that power, or did he require the concurrence of Congress to be able to make that decision and actually withdraw from the United Nations. So thankfully that line of thought was not pursued, because it turned out that he was just considering withdrawing from the United Nations, but didn't actually pursue it. And also, before a big decision like this, there has to be a study, ideally, on what the country stands to lose if we withdrew from a particular organization as big as the United Nations. And it's also true for some of the treaties and conventions that we signed on before. Like, for example, the United States was a member of the Human Rights Council. It withdrew from that. It also withdrew from the World Health Organization for reasons that they explained. And all of that was the decision of the executive, the president, right? So a lot of it depends also on how the domestic structure is set up, on whether that particular decision can be made by the head of the executive branch.
Thank you for this little celebration on the United Nations Big Day. You were here with us last year when I think we're the only school who successfully celebrated the Diamond Year of the United Nations. So now we're here, and thank you for being here. We will let the whole world know we are celebrating today. We have recorded this. But one thing I want you to know about the presence of Ma'am Kira here with you is that when I had a chance to go around the United Nations offices in the headquarters, and I was surprised to see a number of Sillimanians. That was many years back, though. From a driver of an ambassador to a secretary in an office to a director of the World Health Organization. So can you imagine that? There is something in a Sillimanian that can really survive whatever body of ocean you want to conquer. So go beyond the horizon where you are now. Remember, you are a Sillimanian, and be inspired. You can actually go beyond the portals and journey and make us proud. So thank you. We celebrate the United Nations 76th year. And thank you, Ma'am Kira, for being here with us in our little celebration.
Wow, what a very wonderful discussion. I am so happy that within 76 years, the United Nations never stopped taking care of our respective countries. God bless the United Nations. Thank you, Daryl Robinson, and thank you so much to our virtual guest of honor, Ma'am Kira Danghanan Asuzena. Your achievement as a Sillimanian is so inspiring. Ma'am Kira, we will now present to you our virtual certificate of appreciation. Again, thank you, Ma'am Kira, Daryl, and all the participants from Germany, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and United Nations. Now, let us move on to the second part of this International Cultural Exchange 2021.